Thank you so much, Jeremy. Well, hello to all those who have joined us online. My name is Robert Baines. I am the President and the CEO of the NATO Association of Canada. We're a charitable NGO dedicated to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. NATO, as you'll imagine, is becoming more important every day. We have a poly crisis spread over the globe, so many different issues that need to be dealt with in a multilateral environment. And luckily, Canada is part of this amazing alliance of 32 members that is NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed on the simple idea of an attack upon one is an attack upon all, that the best way to maintain peace is by projecting and practicing our strength. And that has worked so well for 76 years, and we're going to keep it going. NATO is so important to Canada, and that's what the NATO Association is here to do, to inform Canadians about that importance. It's not something that you usually have to think about on a day-to-day basis, but it is something that requires constant work and effort. And that's one of the reasons why the increased defense spending that has been dedicated over the past month is so important to us. And it's really one of our goals to make sure that we can help Canadians understand how security is woven into their everyday environment. It's essentially an invisible piece of infrastructure that undergirds all of your experiences here in Canada, and while we're interacting with the rest of the world and creating the kind of world that we would want. So today, obviously, is one of our terrific online events. We do put on events in person as well in Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, Ottawa, Vancouver, Edmonton and Calgary. We're hoping to expand as well to other cities across Canada. But our main goal is to engage with community and to show the value of the NATO community to all of Canada. So please do follow us online, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, of course, here on YouTube. Please do subscribe. Yeah, why don't we get off to the races and start our actual discussion? I'm really, really pleased today that we do have the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom to Canada, and we have three fine moderators, part of our important team here at the NATO Association, who will be starting the discussion. So I'll hand it off to Lishba, Avani, and Marina to start the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our diplomatic speaker series exploring Canada's relations with its NATO allies and partners in a constantly evolving global security environment. My name is Avani Singh, and I'm an engagement coordinator with the NATO Association of Canada. If I could...
Hi, my name is Marina Zaki, and I'm an engagement coordinator at the NATO Association of Canada.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alishba Naman, and I am an event coordinator at the NATO Association of Canada.
Today, we will be discussing the United Kingdom's role in NATO. Before we get started, I'd like to give a brief history of the UK's participation in NATO. On April 4th, 1949, the United Kingdom became one of the 12 founding members of NATO, playing a central role in establishing the alliance to deter Soviet aggression and ensure collective security in Europe and North America. Throughout the Cold War, the UK hosted critical NATO command centers and contributed significant military capabilities, including nuclear deterrence under the UK's independent strategic forces. The UK has remained a steadfast NATO ally, participating in NATO missions from the Balkans to Afghanistan and leading the NATO-enhanced forward presence in Estonia. As a nuclear power and permanent member of the UN Security Council, the UK continues to champion NATO's adaptation to new security challenges, including cyber threats, hybrid warfare, and the rise of authoritarian regimes. In recent years, the UK has also increased defense spending, now rising to meet NATO's new 5% GDP guideline, and has provided leadership in reinforcing NATO's eastern flank following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We will explore significant issues today with His Excellency Rob Tinline. Before we begin with the High Commissioner's opening statements, I would like to briefly go over his biography for our audience. High Commissioner Robert Tinline was appointed as British High Commissioner to Canada in August 2024. He previously served as the Director for Strategy at the United Kingdom Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, or the FCDO, where he helped shape UK foreign policy priorities across security, defense, and international development. Earlier in his career, he held key diplomatic postings in Brussels, working on the UK's relationship with the EU, and in Washington, D.C., covering transatlantic security and trade. Hi, Commissioner. We invite you to begin some opening remarks before we proceed to the moderated questions.
Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to join you. So I've been in the diplomatic service for over 25 years, and for much of that period, there has been a debate about exactly what NATO is for and how NATO should develop going forwards. And the thing that strikes me about this moment is that there isn't that debate anymore. There is a real clarity of mission coming out of the summit in The Hague, a real clarity on ambition, of purpose, and on the absolute essential role of NATO within all of our security. So it feels to me that this is a moment where, as I say, more than it has been the case for probably a quarter of a century, there is a real sense amongst allies of exactly why we need NATO, exactly why it is important to invest in it, and a determination to make that happen. Sort of backing up a bit, as you say, the UK has been in NATO from the start. It has always been, first of all, a defensive alliance. It's really important that we keep talking about that absolute core principle of NATO. It is there as a defensive alliance. It has been a cornerstone of our security throughout the Cold War and beyond. As you say, it was at the heart of the Afghanistan mission, which was an unusual mission for NATO, going out of area and adapting to a whole new set of challenges. But we are at a period where we are all refocusing on that core Euro-Atlantic security role for NATO. We in the United Kingdom have just, obviously, our government changed a year ago today. So we are a year into Keir Starmer's government, and when he came into office, he decided to have a strategic defence review, which was the first for some time, and which reported last month. It was led by a former NATO Secretary General, Lord Robertson, which I think tells you a little about the mindset of the government going into the review. And Lord Robertson was actually out here in Ottawa the week before it was launched, so had an excellent opportunity to talk to many Canadians about what was coming. And that review really looked in depth at what the UK needs to do in terms of its defence. And it focused on a wide range of issues about increasing capability, building up industry so industry can deliver the capabilities that we need. One of the lessons from Ukraine actually is that throughout the sort of era where we were more focused on Afghanistan and those sorts of threats, it was less about being able to produce large numbers of munitions at pace. Now we're in a world where we need to think about how we will produce munitions at pace and other capabilities. So there was a set of things about how we build up our capabilities, and there were announcements, as you'd expect, around the sort of fighter jets and the sort of hardware. A lot about industry and how we equip industry to step up. A lot about innovation. Again, one of the lessons of Ukraine is how quickly both sides actually have adapted to the tactics and equipment of the other, and that innovation cycle has been incredibly quick through the conflict, and how we embed that into our defense systems. And so there's a whole set of building blocks in there. But one of the key messages one of the key decisions, one of the key priorities was to say we will take a NATO first approach to our defence. Now, that's not NATO only. We're still our carrier strike group is currently in the Pacific, with the Ville de Quebec from the Canadian Navy alongside, actually. But so it's not saying that we'll only look at security in the NATO area, but it is a very clear statement in a way we've not done in the recent past that NATO first is at the core of our defence, and trying to make sure that what we do together with allies really does build NATO, build the capabilities we collectively need in NATO, and equip NATO to be able to deal with the challenges ahead. A word on Ukraine, because clearly Ukraine is a key element of all of this. We changed government a year ago, but our policy towards Ukraine has not changed. It is a matter of very strong political consensus in the United Kingdom from across the political divide that we must continue with the level of support that we provide Ukraine. That needs to continue at a very high tempo, whether that's military support or broader support. We must stick with Ukraine and provide them with the support they need, and we will continue to do so. So that is clearly a really significant effort with a lot of resource behind it that will continue alongside the work that's happening in terms of building up our own defences and how we do that collectively. And as part of that, the Coalition of the Willing effort, which the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has led alongside Emmanuel Macron in particular, but bringing in Mark Carney in Canada and leaders across Europe to try and say, we have the US has borne a disproportionate share of the burden of European security, Euro-Atlantic security for a long time. How do we step up the European, Canadian element of that to make sure that we really are there to support Ukraine through whatever comes next? And that, I think, has been another element of this effort that is alongside NATO, but is bringing together those allies to say, okay, how can we step up? So that all takes us to the summit. As I say, it was I think the clarity of mission and purpose came out very, very strongly. Clearly, the headline out of that is the 5%, and that commitment to really step up investment. As the Prime Minister in Canada, Mark Carney, has made very clear, how you spend that money, that is a proxy for building capability. The objective is not to spend the money. The objective is to get the capability that the money buys you. And so how we get to that level of spend in a way that really delivers the capabilities that we need is the challenge going forward. But the unity that you saw in The Hague, I think, was really impressive and really important. And as I say, our strategic defence review, which the government has endorsed in full, is very clear. For the United Kingdom, it's NATO first.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for such a great introduction and for your opening remarks. We'll now be going into the moderated discussion, and I'll start us off with the very first question. Last year marked the 75th anniversary of NATO, a milestone that invites both reflection and strategic foresight. How does the United Kingdom specifically view NATO's evolution, and in what ways is the alliance preparing to confront the challenges of today's security environment, from hybrid warfare to emerging technologies?
Thank you. So yeah, as I say, I think NATO had a very, very clear purpose for a first sort of 50 or so years of its existence. And then for much of the last 25 years, the focus on security in the European mainland has been lessened. And I think so. I think what you see in terms of a reflection is that that real focus back on Euro-Atlantic security and what NATO and only NATO can bring to that came out very strongly from the summit. So in terms of reflection, I think the reflection for me is that NATO feels like it is at the core of our work in a way that it hasn't felt for the last 25. It's still been important, and it's still played a very valuable role in Afghanistan and elsewhere, but it's back at the core of how we do defense, think about defense. It sort of dominates that piece. So for me, NATO is in, coming out of its 75th birthday, is as essential, if not more essential, than ever. But that's not the NATO of 1950 or the NATO of 1970. There are differences, as you say, in terms of technology and in terms of approach. And so I think the big challenge that we brought out in our strategic defense review are, if you like, those that kind of go across the NATO allies and NATO as an institution. How do you make sure you've got the industries that you need to be able to create the capabilities that you need? How do you get to the place where you can innovate faster and you can really defense procurement systems don't have the best reputation anywhere in the world for speed and agility. But actually, when you look at the speed and agility in which Ukraine has adapted and in which we have adapted in supporting Ukraine, that is really impressive. And it has been at the core of equipping Ukraine in its fight. So how do we try and take some of that and build it back into our procurement systems, so we are thinking about the new capabilities that we need, and then having that innovation loop that is much quicker. The other element that I think comes out of our defence review, I think is true across NATO, is about, we talk about it as being more lethal, and it's essentially trying to say, how do we make sure that the war-fighting hard edge of NATO is as effective as it can be? And there is a lot of learning, again, from Ukraine about what is it that makes our militaries capable of being more lethal. The point of that, coming back to where I started, this is a defensive alliance, right? The point of that is to deter in the first instance, right? Is to show that we are strong enough that we can handle anything that may come and therefore prevent that from coming. That is the core point of all of this, not as an offensive, but as a defensive alliance. But being able to meet the threat is what will prevent the threat from being realized. And so how we do that in a way that has the industrial base, the innovation, and the sort of lethality, the effectiveness in warfighting, I think are the three things that I would draw out as we go into NATO's, well, we're already in NATO's fourth quarter century.
Thank you for your answer. Just with that, continuing on the theme of reflections, as seen at this year's Hague Summit, Ukraine remains central to the transatlantic agenda. So what outcomes is the UK hoping to see enforced following the commitment from NATO regarding support from Ukraine, whether in terms of long-term security commitments, institutional integration, or post-conflict recovery planning?
So some of, I mean, this is a space I sort of said in my introduction, where some of this goes through NATO. Some of it goes through different groupings, some of it's bilateral support between a specific country and NATO and Ukraine. So I think I don't want to talk about it kind of just in a sort of NATO organizational frame, if you like. It's about the countries, the allies that make up NATO and others delivering the support for Ukraine in the way that they need it, and it can best be delivered. And we have worked incredibly hard with allies across NATO and beyond on continuing that support. It is billions and billions of pounds a year that goes in from the United Kingdom and from others, and there is no wavering in that support from the UK, and I don't see the overall support going down. It's critical to the effort, and so I think what you saw in the NATO summit was NATO focusing mainly on NATO and how NATO invests in its own defences, but alongside that, countries being very clear about their continued support for Ukraine, both politically and in the really significant money that goes alongside that. And we've had the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, continues to convene allies, as I say, with Emmanuel Macron and others around the coalition of the willing model to try and make sure that we are prepared to support Ukraine wherever, whether the conflict continues at the intensity that it is, whether there is some sort of a talks process. At the moment, there is no sign that President Putin is in any way interested in taking that seriously, but we are ready should that develop. So I see, and certainly in the United Kingdom, that commitment to Ukraine is ironclad, and I see that across the alliance as well.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. Speaking of allies and the wide lens that NATO holds, NATO's deepening engagement in the Indo-Pacific has garnered increasing attention. How does the United Kingdom interpret the strategic importance of this shift, and what role does London envision for itself and for Canada in supporting these partnerships, particularly with Japan, South Korea, and Australia?
So, NATO has a core mission, which is about Euro-Atlantic security, and say it's a defensive mission. And so the most important role of NATO is that core mission of Euro-Atlantic security, and that remains so. And there is more than ever to be done in that space. But the world is interconnected, and we want to work with that. We don't simply want to work with the allies that are part of NATO. We work very intensively with the Australians, with the Japanese, with the South Koreans, with others across the Asia and Pacific as well. As I say, our carrier strike group's currently in the Pacific, in part to exercise with those allies. So the security threats are linked. They are global, and we need to treat them as such. And NATO obviously has a role as it brings together allies in that. That won't just be NATO, as I say. There will be other different configurations of groups. We've got the AUKUS group that brings together the UK, US, and Australia to do specific things. There will be different groups of countries that work in different ways. But NATO will clearly have to continue to think about global security while kind of intensifying its focus on that core mission in the Euro-Atlantic, which is why we set it up and which remains essential.
Thank you very much. Tying in international military and financial support, we'd like to go back and ask how the UK sees NATO's role evolving in helping and supporting Ukraine rebuild, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and democratic resilience.
Yeah, so again, it's kind of how we think about NATO. There is a role for NATO within the broader effort, and so NATO allies, the countries that make up NATO are absolutely the ones providing the core of that support, and they will continue to do it. We will continue to need to adapt to what the Ukrainians need, to how the conflict is developing, there will be different roles at different times for different countries in different ways. So it will be a patchwork of ways in which Ukraine is supported to defend its sovereignty and its territory and its people. There is a role for NATO in that, and NATO has a there are training elements of it. There are more political elements of it, but it's part of a whole that, as I say, with the coalition of the willing, with bilateral elements, with NATO, it all kind of comes together to make sure Ukraine has what it wants. But the coordination and the forum that NATO provides is really important and at the heart of that, and clearly something that the Ukrainians also want the role for.
Thank you, High Commissioner. With that, we want to dive in more into the relationship that both UK and Canada have. So the UK and Canada have historically enjoyed a very strong bilateral relationship rooted in shared values and mutual defense. How is that relationship evolving in today's geopolitical climate, and what opportunities exist for deeper UK-Canada cooperation, both within NATO and also beyond?
Yeah. So obviously, my Prime Minister was in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and came through Ottawa on his way to Kananaskis to talk to Mark Carney and really kind of get into kind of where the UK and Canada can do more together. Obviously, you in Canada have a government with a new mandate, and as I say, our government is a year into its mandate. So we have a moment to sort of look forward about what we want to do together. As you say, the relationship is already incredibly deep. I mean, coming to Canada, as I've traveled around, I've been to, I think, 5 provinces and 3 territories so far. You sort of see the depth of relationship, and I've got a whole range of military personnel kind of broadly under the High Commission who are embedded in Canadian forces or liaison officers to Canadian forces. We've got a British military training unit in Alberta. There's lots that we do together already in many different ways, but there is more we can do. And we are both stepping up defence spend. We are both, as you say, as part of NATO, but also bilaterally looking at how we work together and where we can do more. So I think there are some really significant areas. Obviously, one of them is around sort of slightly outside the defence space, but linked to it, the sort of Five Eyes relationship. We've got a very strong sort of security intelligence relationship. There are elements of that where we can look at how we can work more closely together. There are some fantastic examples on procurement where one of my visits was to a shipyard in Halifax, a Canadian shipyard, investing in Canadian skills, Canadian jobs to build new destroyers for the Canadian Navy. But rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper, they have drawn on the design that the UK used for our destroyers, which will mean that Canada gets its destroyers more quickly, more cheaply than it would be if it started from a blank sheet of paper. That's a fantastic bit of cooperation, which is just starting and is going to run through for years to come. And there is more we can do in those sorts of spaces that says, how can we, as we both step up our work on defence, kind of share more, do more together. It won't just be the UK and Canada, it'll be UK, Canada, and other countries, it'll be in NATO, it'll be all sorts of different configurations. But the imperative on ensuring that the money that we pledged at The Hague isn't simply money spent, but is capabilities delivered, requires us to work together. And the interoperability that is at the heart of NATO, where you want all of the NATO militaries to be able to work together in a seamless way, kind of means that You don't want 30 different types of tank in NATO. You want to have that cooperation. I think there's a lot within in Canadian industry and UK industry where it comes together. The other thing I would just touch on is the innovation aspect, where I think and that is not just to defence. It goes more broadly into sort of innovation in the economy. Actually, UK and Canada, you saw a lot of it in the statement by the two prime ministers. We have sort of similar ecosystems in many ways, quite complementary. How we build those links even further as we get into sort of the frontier technologies to make sure that we kind of protect jobs and growth in our countries, obviously, but also find the ways of building the common capabilities that we'll need on the defence side off that, I think, really important.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. So as you mentioned, the Hague Summit and defense spending, I would like to focus more on the part related to defense spending. So as you mentioned, this year's summit, the NATO allies endorsed a new target of 5% of GDP for total defense-related spending, which is a significant leap from the previous 2% benchmark. So how does the United Kingdom view this shift, both in terms of feasibility and strategic necessity, and what implications might this have for transatlantic burden sharing, particularly for countries like Canada?
So 2%. I mean, we went through 2% some time ago. I think there's been a pretty strong consensus for some time that defense spending, because we need the capabilities, not because of spending for its own sake, but the investment in the capabilities needed to be higher. And so we're on a path to 2.5% in the next year, 18 months, and then the 5% target is a 2035 target. So it will be an incremental, I hope not a slow, but an incremental move up to the 5%. And the 5% is there's two elements of the 5%. There's an element which is kind of core defense spend, sort of as defined currently, the 2%. So that is the 3.5% number. And then the 1.5% is a slightly different category of broader security spend, which takes you more into some of the areas of sort of outside core defense that even so are very, very important to sort of step up our protection on sort of cybersecurity, other sort of things that wouldn't necessarily fall within the core 3.5%. So that step up from 2% to 3.5% on the core defense, that's over a decade, and we want it to move fast. As I say, we don't want it all to happen at the end. It needs to start happening now. But that should give us, UK, but other countries as well, the ability to ensure it's spent well. Yeah, as I say, part of what we're trying to do is increase the industrial base to service that increase in defence spend. So our view, and obviously it was sort of long thought out and long talked about at NATO in the run up to the summit, is that 5% is a good target, is the right target to set. We do need to drive a step change in investment, and that's what this will do. That should be over time, so we can make sure it's spent well and create the capacity in our systems to spend it well. But it's definitely needed. And then with the 1.5, which is the other element, I think there's further work to be done on exactly what that looks like in terms of what we're talking about and what that means. But that is a really important element, which we're also stepping up in terms of, as I say, some of the broader elements of security that need to be hardened. So our view, very much, it's the right target. It's right that we're not moving there immediately. We've got a bit of time to make sure that we're spending the money well and to create the capability to actually spend that money. Clearly, it means choices. in public spending, and the government has been very open in the UK that it requires choice in public spending, because if you spend more on defence, you can't spend that same money on something else. But it has been, but you know, the consensus across the political spectrum in the UK has been that it is important that we do this now, and so we will do it.
Thank you very much. Shifting a little bit, as NATO enters its 8th decade, the Arctic is becoming an increasingly strategic region due to climate change and shifting geopolitical interests. Given the UK's growing interest in Arctic security, as demonstrated by its participation in Arctic exercises such as Operation Clockwork, how does the United Kingdom see its role evolving in this theater specifically, and what avenues does it see for deeper cooperation with Arctic allies like Canada and Norway, especially under NATO's evolving deterrence and defense posture?
So I've just actually come back from 10 days up in the Canadian Arctic, and sort of seeing some of the communities up there, but also some of the facilities where Canada does research and does military exercising, and other things, and sort of reflecting a little bit and hearing from communities locally about how the climate's changing, how they see their security, and how what they're looking to from the renewed focus by the Canadian government in Arctic security. So look, as the UK, we're not an Arctic nation, but we're pretty close, and we've always had a strong interest in security across sort of the North Atlantic and into the Arctic. You know, it's a very strategic area for us, in terms of protecting the United Kingdom and also protecting the North Atlantic. So how Arctic security works has always been at the heart of our defence as we look north from the UK, and we work very closely with a set of mainly Nordic partners on what's called the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is a sort of it's not NATO, but it's kind of NATO adjacent, if you like, of us working with a set of North European partners on looking at how we can create the capabilities, create the interoperability, do the exercises together to really make sure that we're able to work effectively together. As the climate changes, it becomes easier to transit the Arctic, although still not easy. That will increase. I think honestly, there is exactly what that looks like going forward, I think is something that there is further work on how NATO wants to position itself in the Arctic, how the UK wants to position itself with partners in the Arctic. As I say, we've done quite a lot with some of the European kind of Arctic nations. As Canada steps up, I think that's a conversation for us and Canada to have in more depth as part of the broader NATO conversation of, you know, what is it that we should be doing to cooperate, bring some of the lessons from Europe across, from Canada, Europe, and try and make sure that we're looking at it as a coherent high north rather than looking at it in separate ways. So that is definitely in the category of more work to be done to flesh out how we cooperate in more depth over the decades to come.
Thank you, High Commissioner. With that, another question is that given the rise threat of disinformation, what lessons has the UK drawn from its own experiences, and how can it work with partners like Canada to enhance democratic safeguards in media literacy?
So, look, it's a I mean, this takes a sort of, I mean, it's sort of, it's a common NATO concern, but it takes us slightly away from NATO, because a lot of the work that has been done in this space has been done as the G7, and trying to kind of share lessons, respond more collectively to some of these challenges. And obviously, especially as you go through particular peaks around elections and around other things like that, there is a sort of particular attention on kind of the disinformation space. So look, I think we've been we set up something called our National Cybersecurity Centre probably about 10 years ago now, which, because we realised that sort of cybersecurity, and this is sort of, I know this is slightly off the disinformation, but it sort of overlaps, because we recognised that essentially you had society thinking about it in one way, and sort of business, and then you had the sort of intelligence and security agencies sort of in a sort of high security sort of bubble. And actually what we needed was to have a much broader conversation, drawing on the sort of intelligence expertise we have and the capabilities there, but actually bringing in kind of society, business, organizations to try and increase the literacy and the capability of organizations to be cyber secure. And that everything from kind of, you know, direct sort of attacks to try and steal information or ransom or whatever, all the way through to how do you try and make the sort of cyber world a more resilient one, and increase people's kind of personal awareness of everything they can do to support it. So we put a big effort into that. I think it has changed the conversation quite a lot in the UK, and they have also done quite a bit, as say, with quite often with G7 partners, on then trying to call out behaviour by other groups or states that is unacceptable. And actually, because one of the problems with this is that some of it goes, it's hard to identify, it's hard to attribute, and actually try and make sure that where this is kind of state organization-based sort of disinformation or attacks, we are better at calling it out, identifying it, calling it out, and saying that it's happening. And then obviously you get into the whole raft of broader disinformation, which is, you know, from people, you know, it can be anything, right? It can be, you know, it can be anybody trying to influence a debate in a way that they shouldn't. And that is a much harder set of issues to get into, and a lot of that comes down to kind of more broadly how you deal with free speech in society. And you've seen, you know, we've done quite a lot in terms of online harms legislation to try and begin to protect children in particular more from certain types of online harm. And some of that plays into the sort of disinformation space. So there's a sort of there's a wide breadth of challenges that we face, I say, from sort of direct attacks by organized groups or states, all the way through to essentially people, you know, individuals in their bedroom spreading lies, and you know, how you create the ecosystem to be able to deal with that. We've done quite a lot of work on it, as I say, over the years, both in terms of setting up new institutions in legislation, and then trying to sort of build awareness in the public. And a lot of that has been coordinated across the G7. So there's been quite a lot of work across the G7 to try and share experiences, share best practice, and also to you know, we all have different contexts, right? And some of them are some of what we deal with is common. Some of what we deal with is very specific to our countries for whatever reason, and so also trying to draw out where there are differences and things don't translate.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. Thank you so much for expanding on all our questions. This concludes the moderated part of our discussion. And now we'll head to the Q&A part of our interview from our live audience on YouTube.
Great.
So for those watching, please continue sharing your questions in the chat and we'll address as many as possible in the time remaining. So first question, why did transatlantic trade decline, requiring London and Ottawa to renegotiate agreements and reorient markets throughout the 20th century?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Absolutely. Why did transatlantic trade decline, requiring London and Ottawa to renegotiate agreements and reorient markets throughout the 20th century?
So, I mean, in this job, I think looking back at, I spend less of trying to spend less of my time looking back at the 20th century, more time looking forward into the second half of the 21st. So, and our history is obviously a big part of what binds our two countries together. But look, the way I kind of look at my role here is essentially a sort of forward-looking one, and is essentially around, okay, how can we, on the two biggest priorities, mainly, not exclusively, but mainly it's around how do we drive growth in both of our economies, and how do we increase our security for our people and for our nations. And those, I think, are the two things that are at the core of what I'm here to do. So I try to respect history and think about history. And on Canada Day, I was at the War Memorial, recognizing the sacrifices that Newfoundlanders made in the First World War. So you need to look back at history, but I think for me, the key for this job is how do we build our trade and our security further together, and there's a lot we can do in that.
Thank you so much. The next question asks, what implications do successful Ukrainian drone strikes Russian drones resulting in destruction of long-range bombers have on NATO's capability development, particularly in the terms of counter-UAS systems, early warning integration, and the protection of high-value assets with the alliance territory?
Yeah, so as I say, there's a huge amount we can learn from the Ukrainian experience, and I think the question pulls out some of the absolute core ones of in a capability sense, how do we make sure that we've got the capabilities to do some of the things that the Ukrainians have developed and designed, and that we're keeping ahead of the curve, or on the absolute cutting edge as technology and practice and countermeasures change. But we also need to reflect about what the lessons are in terms of the defensive, of how do you make sure you're thinking through how those technologies could be used against us. And absolutely, that's absolutely the core of what our strategic defence review is trying to say as the UK, and I think NATO is looking at as well, is part of the lesson of what's happened in Ukraine is that you do need tanks and artillery in a way that you didn't need tanks and artillery in Afghanistan. Right? Some of this is quite traditional kind of capabilities, and some of it is incredibly cutting edge capabilities. And doing both of those seriously, it's one of the reasons why you need more money, because it is more complicated to span that breadth of capability. And the question is absolutely right. It's about how do we defend ourselves against those capabilities, as well as how do we create those capabilities for ourselves.
Thank you so much. Expanding on this question, I'd like to focus on the Canadian part. So how might Canada's industrial participation in these areas enhance its strategic value within NATO, influence future procurement and interoperability let's say, frameworks?
So, look, the way I think about this is that every country needs to be able to show its people that the money it's spending on defense is creating jobs and growth and prosperity within the country, right? It's not simply money sent overseas, right? So we all need to show that to our people. But if you do that as every British pound must be spent in Britain and every Canadian dollar must be spent in Canada, then you end up in a place where you are trying to create whole kind of you completely kind of national capabilities to do everything. And as we've talked about, the breadth of the challenges mean that you can't do that. And so I think the challenge that we've got collectively over the next few years is lifting the industry up in all of our countries, but not trying to create an industry in every country to do everything, but trying to find ways that NATO's common capability is lifted. It's benefiting all of our peoples in different ways, but it's not kind of siloed. And I think that is the challenge in Canada, as Canada spends more with some of the great Canadian companies that Canada's got, has a key role in that, right? And when the Prime Minister says we want more Canada, yeah, we want more Canada. We would love Canada to increase its capabilities, whether that's industrial, whether that's defense.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for all your inputs and insights. Now I'll hand it off to Robin.
Thanks so much, Marina. And Vani, Lishbag, terrific conversation. Rob, it's a real pleasure to have this kind of conversation with you. And the great thing is, as well, is that so few Canadians often get to see high commissioners and ambassadors in the flesh, as it were. So the ability of us to have this conversation and to push it as far afield as possible is really one of our main goals. It's much more difficult to envision some kind of a conspiracy theory if you actually know the people involved and understand their real reasons for being dedicated to our countries, the whole idea behind multilateralism. So that's really what we're trying to do, and I'm so thrilled that you've been able to join us today and have this discussion. I look forward to having also in-person events. In the past, we've had the absolute pleasure of joining at the High Commission for our NATO Beer Festival, which is one of our time-honored traditions, wherein we get those people who may not know that much about NATO, but they sure like beer, to come and talk about the alliance while enjoying the fruits of peace, which is one of the main ideas we're trying to get across, is that it's not separate, it's not divisible, that peace is part of every true moment that we treasure, every bit of culture that we produce. Security is underwritten that it runs through it like a golden thread. So our beer festival is a terrific way of being able to do that, and we do hope we'll be able to have some participation from the United Kingdom again in the fall, perhaps.
Great, thank you. Look, it would be fantastic to do these things in the flesh. It's always good to do them in the flesh, and if you've got a beer in your hand, then also the good as well. But look, thank you. I think NATO is an incredible organization, and you go there. I've spent quite a bit of time in NATO over the years, and it's an incredible place where so many countries work together in a really meaningful and important way, and so it's great to be able to have a bit of time to talk to people about that. It's a joy that there are people in Canada wanting to have the conversation and are interested in it. So thank you all for joining.
Thanks so much, High Commissioner. And for those watching, please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course, do follow us, subscribe on YouTube to join future conversations. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, the live stream is done. Great job, guys.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks so much.